For decades, American trucks have stood as symbols of strength, grit, and the promise of reliability. They've been workhorses on farms, companions on road trips, and the pride of driveways across the country. But not every truck lives up to the legend. Some rolled out of factories with problems so glaring, they left owners frustrated, wallets drained, and reputations ruined. These weren't just minor hiccups. These were full-blown disasters disguised as pickups. And if you've been around the truck world long enough, you've probably seen a few of these firsthand. From trucks that rusted before their first oil change, to engines that self-destructed at the worst possible moment. Today, we're counting down the 10 worst American trucks of all time. Whether you owned one or narrowly avoided the nightmare, this list will bring back memories, and maybe even a little relief that yours survived. Number 10. Chevrolet SSR, 2003 to 2006. When Chevrolet unveiled the SSR in the early 2000s, it looked like something out of a dream, or maybe out of a design team's feverish late-night brainstorming session. A retro-styled pickup with swooping curves, a retractable hardtop, and a flashy muscle car attitude, it was supposed to blend nostalgia with modern innovation. At first glance, it turned heads everywhere. But once people actually drove it, reality set in fast. The SSR was all style and no substance. First, it was heavy. Really heavy. At nearly 4,700 pounds, it weighed more than a Tahoe, yet it only offered seating for two and a tiny bed covered in carpet. Owners quickly realized this truck could barely carry a lawnmower, let alone handle serious hauling. The earliest models came with a 5.3-liter V8 that put out just 300 horsepower. Decent for a sedan, but laughably underpowered for something this bulky. Later models upgraded to the LS2 V8, but by then, the damage was done. The SSR was slow, cumbersome, and far less practical than any traditional pickup on the market. And let's talk about price. At nearly $42,000 starting in 2003, and often higher with options, it was competing against full-size trucks that could tow, haul, and actually work for a living. Buyers who wanted performance went for Corvettes or Mustangs, while those who wanted utility bought Silverados or F-150S. The SSR fell awkwardly in between, offering the worst of both worlds. Reviews at the time didn't hold back. Critics mocked its sluggish acceleration, bizarre proportions, and impractical design. Car and Driver famously called it a futile exercise in retro excess, and even loyal Chevy fans struggled to defend it. Production limped along until 2006, when GM finally pulled the plug after selling fewer than 25,000 units. Today, the SSR lives on mostly as a curiosity, a truck that looked like a comic book drawing come to life, but failed to deliver in every category that mattered. For many, it was less super sport roadster and more seriously slow relic. As a truck, it was a joke. As an experiment, it was an expensive lesson in what happens when style trumps substance. Number 9. Dodge Dakota, 2007 to 2011. The Dodge Dakota has an important place in American truck history. When it first hit the market in the late 1980s, it carved out a niche as a true mid-size pickup, bigger than the compact Rangers and S-Teens, but smaller and easier to handle than the full-size Ram or F-150. For years, it gave Dodge something different to offer buyers who wanted utility without the bulk. But by the time the third-generation Dakota rolled out in 2007, the magic was gone. On paper, the 2007 to 2011 Dakota should have been a winner. Dodge redesigned it with aggressive styling, added an optional 4.7-liter V8, and promised class-leading towing. But the reality was far less impressive. For starters, the truck had grown so large that it was nearly the same size as some full-size pickups. This left it stranded in an awkward no-man's land. Too big for people who wanted a compact, too small and underpowered for those who needed a full size. The problems didn't stop there. The base V6 engine was notoriously underwhelming, producing just 210 horsepower to move a truck that weighed more than 4,000 pounds. Fuel economy was dismal, mid-teens at best, and with gas prices spiking in the late 2000s, that was enough to turn buyers away. Meanwhile, the interior quality was a letdown. Hard plastics, poor ergonomics, and cheap-feeling finishes made the cabin feel more like a rental car than a serious competitor in the truck market. Reliability also became a sore point. Owners complained about electrical gremlins, premature transmission issues, and suspension components that wore out faster than they should. The resale value plummeted, and even loyal Dodge fans admitted the truck felt more like an afterthought than a serious contender. Perhaps the biggest flaw, though, was timing. By the late 2000s, competitors like Toyota with the Tacoma and Nissan with the Frontier were offering smaller, more efficient trucks that appealed to younger buyers. Meanwhile, Ford's F-150 and Chevy's Silverado dominated the full-size segment with more capability and better refinement. The Dakota ended up stuck in the middle, appealing to almost no one. Sales collapsed year after year, and by 2011, Dodge quietly discontinued it, ending what could have been a proud legacy. Today, the third-gen Dakota is remembered less as a pioneer and more as a cautionary tale. It tried to be everything at once, but failed to satisfy anyone. For older truck fans who remember the original Dakota's sweet spot in the market, the bloated and uninspired final generation felt like a betrayal of what made the nameplate special in the first place. Instead of carrying on as the mid-size king, the Dakota bowed out as one of the most disappointing American trucks of its era. Number 8. Lincoln Blackwood, 2002. When Lincoln announced it was building a luxury pickup truck in the early 2000s, the idea turned heads. Americans loved their pickups, and Lincoln figured it could merge luxury car comfort with truck toughness. On paper, it made sense. An upscale F-150, wrapped in premium leather, topped off with Lincoln's badge of prestige. But what rolled off the production line in 2002 wasn't a trailblazer. It was a disaster. The Blackwood looked flashy enough. It had a glossy black paint job with fake wood grain stripes along the sides, a unique chrome grille, and an interior fitted with plush leather seats and premium sound systems. Underneath, it borrowed heavily from the Ford F-150, but Lincoln marketed it as something far more sophisticated. The problem? In trying to be luxurious, it forgot to be a truck. The most infamous flaw was the bed. Instead of a practical open cargo box, the Blackwood came with a permanently covered, carpet-lined bed that was more like a giant trunk. It even had stainless steel trim and power-operated doors. It looked cool, but it was completely useless for hauling lumber, tools, or just about anything that makes a pickup a pickup. Want to toss a dirty load of gravel in the back? Forget it. The Blackwood's cargo box was about as work-ready as a limousine's trunk. To make matters worse, the truck was only available in one color, black, and only offered in rear-wheel drive. That immediately alienated a huge chunk of buyers who lived in snowy states or who expected a truck to handle rough terrain. Then there was the price. Starting at over $50,000 in 2002, it was astronomically high for a pickup. Buyers looked at the Blackwood, saw its lack of utility, and simply walked away. Sales were abysmal. In fact, the Blackwood barely lasted a year in the U.S. market, with just over 3,000 units sold. Lincoln pulled the plug almost as quickly as it had hyped it up, leaving behind one of the most embarrassing misfires in pickup history. For older truck fans who lived through that era, the Blackwood was a classic case of a company misjudging its audience. Pickup buyers didn't want carpeted beds or luxury trimmings that turned practical vehicles into delicate showpieces. They wanted strength, durability, and value. The Blackwood had none of those. Today, it's remembered less as a truck and more as a cautionary tale. A $50,000 mistake on wheels that proved luxury and utility don't always mix. Number 7. Chevy Avalanche, 2007 to 2013. The Chevrolet Avalanche was supposed to be one of GM's most innovative trucks. First introduced in 2001, it combined the comfort of an SUV with the versatility of a pickup bed, thanks to its unique midgate, a folding wall that allowed owners to extend the cargo area into the cab. On paper, it was a clever solution. But by the time the second generation hit showrooms in 2007, the novelty had worn thin, and the Avalanche's flaws became impossible to ignore. The biggest complaint was durability. The Avalanche was notorious for its use of extensive plastic body cladding, which looked futuristic at first, but quickly faded, cracked, and warped under sun exposure. Owners in hot and dry climates saw their trucks age poorly in just a few years, with panels that looked like brittle Legos ready to fall off. For a truck marketed as rugged, the Avalanche's exterior often looked worn out long before the engine even hit 100,000 miles. Then there was practicality. While the midgate design was clever, it wasn't always useful in real-world situations. Folding it down often meant exposing the cab to dust, rain, or cold air. And while GM billed the Avalanche as a do-it-all truck, the reality was it wasn't the best at anything. Its towing numbers fell behind the Silverado. Its ride quality wasn't as smooth as the Tahoe or Suburban, and the midgate rarely lived up to the hype outside of very specific use cases. Reliability didn't help its reputation either. Many 2007 to 2013 Avalanches were equipped with GM's 5.3-liter V8, featuring active fuel management. This was the infamous system that deactivated cylinders for fuel savings, but in reality, it led to lifter failures, excessive oil consumption, and fouled spark plugs. Owners grew frustrated with constant trips to the shop, sometimes sinking thousands of dollars into repairs that didn't permanently fix the issues. Sales reflected the public's disappointment. While the first generation sold fairly well due to its novelty, the second generation never captured the same excitement. Buyers simply gravitated toward the Silverado for capability or the Suburban for comfort, leaving the Avalanche stranded in the middle with little appeal. By 2013, GM quietly ended production, and only die-hard fans mourned its loss. For many older truck owners, the Avalanche represents what happens when a good idea gets lost in execution. It promised innovation, but delivered headaches. Instead of revolutionizing the truck market, it became a reminder that sometimes the classics, a simple, rugged pickup with a straightforward bed, work better than flashy experiments. Today, the Avalanche sits in history as a curiosity, remembered more for what it could have been than what it actually was. Number 6. Dodge Ram 50/Plymouth Arrow Pickup, late 1970s to 1980s. Back in the late 1970s and 1980s, compact trucks were starting to make waves in America. Toyota, Nissan, then Datsun, and Mazda were selling small pickups that were affordable, fuel-efficient, and surprisingly durable. Dodge and Plymouth wanted a piece of that market, but instead of designing their own, Chrysler struck a deal with Mitsubishi. The result was the Dodge Ram 50 and its sibling, the Plymouth Arrow pickup. On paper, it gave Chrysler dealers something to offer against the Japanese imports. In reality, it was one of the least memorable and least durable trucks of its time. The biggest issue was reliability. While Toyota's and Nissan's small trucks earned reputations for running nearly forever, the Ram 50 and Arrow often broke down long before hitting high mileage. The engines, especially the smaller four-cylinders, were underpowered and strained under even moderate loads. They were fine for light commuting, but once owners tried to haul anything substantial or climb hills, the little Mitsu-sourced motors struggled badly. Worse, parts availability and dealer support weren't as strong as the Japanese brands, leaving many owners with trucks that spent more time in the shop than on the road. Build quality was another sore point. Interiors felt cheap, rattled easily, and wore out far too quickly. Rust protection was minimal, which meant that in northern states, these trucks disintegrated almost as fast as older American sedans. Buyers who thought they were getting a durable workhorse were disappointed to see frames and panels eaten alive after just a few winters. Compared to a Toyota Hilux or Nissan hardbody, which could still look respectable after a decade, the Dodge Ram 50 looked like a beater in half that time. Then there was the identity crisis. These trucks carried Dodge and Plymouth badges, but everyone knew they were built by Mitsubishi. For older truck buyers who valued American toughness, it felt like a badge engineering trick. Dodge tried to market them as Ram Tough, but the reality was that these were imported compacts trying to play in a league dominated by more reliable and respected Japanese rivals. Customers weren't fooled, and sales never reached the heights Chrysler had hoped for. By the end of the 1980s, the writing was on the wall. Dodge eventually dropped the Plymouth Arrow pickup entirely and later shifted focus to the Dodge Dakota, which at least had its own identity. Today, the Ram 50 and Arrow are mostly forgotten, and maybe that's for the best. For many older truck enthusiasts, they were reminders of a time when Chrysler desperately wanted to compete, but didn't have the engineering muscle to do it right. Instead of standing tall against Toyota and Nissan, the Ram 50 and Plymouth Arrow faded into obscurity, remembered only as a half-hearted attempt that never lived up to the Ram Tough slogan plastered on its ads. Number 5. GMC Envoy XUV, 2004 to 2005. In the early 2000s, GM was chasing every possible niche it could carve out of the SUV and truck market. The GMC Envoy was already a solid mid-size SUV, but someone inside GM decided it needed a radical twist. What if it could transform into a pickup truck? Enter the Envoy XUV, a vehicle that looked like an SUV from the front, but had a retractable roof and slide-in rear cargo doors that turned the back into a pseudo-truck bed. On paper, it sounded like the Swiss Army knife of vehicles. In reality, it became one of the strangest and least successful trucks America ever produced. The Envoy XUV's innovation was its roof. With the push of a button, the rear roof panel would slide forward, opening the cargo area to the sky. It also had a midgate-like partition that could be dropped to extend storage space. GMC pitched it as the best of both worlds, the comfort of an SUV with the utility of a truck. But as soon as people got their hands on it, the flaws were glaring. First, it was heavy and overcomplicated. The retractable roof added hundreds of pounds and countless moving parts. Owners complained about leaks, mechanical failures, and water intrusion. For a truck that was supposed to be versatile, it ended up being delicate and maintenance-heavy. The sliding roof mechanism wasn't just expensive to fix. It often rendered the truck useless when it broke, since it exposed the cargo area to the elements. Then there was the design. The proportions were awkward, with a bulky, squared-off rear that made the Envoy XUV look ungainly compared to its SUV siblings. Truck buyers didn't take it seriously because it couldn't haul much weight, and SUV buyers didn't like the oddball styling or the loss of traditional cargo space. It was too strange for traditionalists and too impractical for innovators. Sales numbers tell the story best. GMC only managed to sell about 27,000 units between 2004 and 2005 before pulling the plug. That might sound like a lot at first, but compared to the hundreds of thousands of SUVs and pickups GM moved in the same years, it was a drop in the bucket. Reviews were harsh, and consumers voted with their wallets, leaving dealers with unsold inventory gathering dust. For older truck fans, the Envoy XUV stands as a perfect example of GM's early 2000s tendency to over-engineer gimmicks instead of focusing on what buyers actually wanted: reliability, capability, and value. Instead of being remembered as a bold innovation, it's mostly remembered as an oddball failure that proved sometimes simpler really is better. The Envoy XUV wasn't a Swiss Army knife. It was more like a clunky gadget that promised everything but delivered nothing. Number 4. Ford Explorer Sport Trac, 2001 to 2005. By the early 2000s, Ford's Explorer was already one of the best-selling SUVs in America. So the idea of taking that platform, stretching it a bit, and slapping a pickup bed on the back must have seemed like an easy win. That's how the Ford Explorer Sport Trac was born. It was marketed as the truck for people who didn't really need a truck, but thought it would be nice to have one anyway. Unfortunately, that compromise left it struggling in every category. The biggest issue was size. The Sport Trac was based on the Explorer SUV, but with its small composite bed, it wasn't big enough to haul anything serious. Try tossing in sheets of plywood or doing heavy-duty towing, and you'd quickly find its limitations. At the same time, it was longer and bulkier than the regular Explorer, which made it less maneuverable for daily driving. It was, quite literally, stuck between worlds, not compact enough to be nimble, not large enough to be truly useful. Performance didn't help its case either. The base 4.0-liter V6 engine produced just 210 horsepower and was saddled with a dated 5-speed automatic. Acceleration was sluggish, fuel economy was dismal, and towing capacity lagged far behind what buyers expected from even mid-sized trucks of the era. The result was a truck that looked sporty but felt underpowered and thirsty. Build quality was another sore spot. Owners complained about cheap interiors, rattling panels, and squeaky suspension components. Rust was also a common enemy, especially in northern climates, where frames and underbodies corroded far quicker than buyers expected. And because it shared much with the Explorer, it inherited that SUV's reputation for transmission problems, further damaging confidence. Sales numbers never lived up to Ford's expectations. While some suburban families liked the novelty of an SUV with a bed, the sport Trac failed to carve out a real market. It wasn't as capable as the Ranger or F-150, and it wasn't as practical as the Explorer itself. By trying to be both, it failed to satisfy either group. For truck fans, the Explorer Sport Trac is remembered as one of Ford's more awkward experiments. A truck for people who didn't really want a truck. It looked interesting in commercials, but real-world use exposed its weaknesses immediately. Today, it's mostly remembered as a curiosity from an era when automakers were desperate to fill every possible niche, even if it meant creating vehicles that didn't truly excel at anything. Number 3. Dodge Ramcharger, 1999 to 2001. The Dodge Ramcharger name carried serious weight in the 1970s and 1980s. Back then, it was Dodge's answer to the Chevy Blazer and Ford Bronco, a big, burly two-door SUV built on truck underpinnings. For years, it had a loyal following, especially among off-roaders and Mopar fans. But by the mid-1990s, Chrysler pulled it from the U.S. market, leaving the Bronco and Blazer to fade away too. Then, in 1999, Dodge tried to revive the Ramcharger, but only in Mexico. What seemed like a nostalgic comeback turned into one of the most forgettable trucks Dodge ever produced. The 1999 to 2001 Ramcharger was built on the Dodge Ram 1500 platform. But unlike its classic ancestors, it was a four-door SUV with styling that looked awkward from the start. It had the face of a second-gen Dodge Ram grafted onto a bloated, boxy body. The proportions were clumsy, and instead of channeling rugged heritage, it looked like an oversized station wagon that couldn't decide if it wanted to be a truck or an SUV. Mechanically, it wasn't much better. Dodge offered it with the 5.2 and 5.9-liter Magnum V8s, engines that were already dated by 1999. Fuel economy was poor, power output lagged behind the competition, and the suspension tuning left it with a sloppy ride. Safety features were bare bones, especially compared to what Ford and GM were adding to their SUVs around the same time. It felt old-fashioned the day it launched. Even in Mexico, where it was targeted, buyers didn't respond. The SUV boom of the late 1990s was dominated by more modern, comfortable, and efficient models. Ford Expeditions, Chevy Tahoes, and even Jeep Grand Cherokees made the Ramcharger look like a dinosaur. Production sputtered along for just a couple of years before Chrysler quietly killed it again. Because it never officially sold in the U.S., the third-gen Ramcharger is mostly a footnote here. But older American truck fans who followed Dodge's lineup at the time still remember it as a missed opportunity. Instead of celebrating its legendary nameplate with a proper modern revival, Dodge slapped the Ramcharger badge on a half-baked SUV that failed to connect with buyers. Today, it's a rarity mostly seen in Mexican classifieds, but among enthusiasts, it's remembered as an embarrassing attempt to cash in on nostalgia without delivering the goods. For a name once associated with muscle and off-road swagger, The 1999 to 2001 Ramcharger ended with a whimper, not a roar, making it one of the worst comeback trucks of all time. Number 2. Chevy CK10 Diesel, 1978 to 1981. The late 1970s were tough years for American automakers. The oil crisis had driven up gas prices, buyers wanted more efficiency, and Detroit was scrambling to respond. General Motors thought it had the perfect answer: put a diesel engine in its full-size pickups. Unfortunately, instead of designing a proper diesel from the ground up, GM took a shortcut. They converted their existing 350 cubic inch Oldsmobile gasoline V8 into a diesel. The result was one of the most infamous failures in American truck history. On paper, the idea made sense. Diesel engines were known for better fuel economy and longevity, so a diesel-powered Chevy CK pickup sounded like a smart move. But the reality was disastrous. The block and head design, carried over from a gasoline platform, couldn't handle the compression ratios required for diesel combustion. Head gaskets blew frequently, cylinder heads cracked, and internal components failed under stresses they were never designed for. What should have been a durable workhorse turned into a fragile time bomb under the hood. Owners who bought these trucks often faced repair bills that dwarfed the value of the vehicle. Engines failed with shocking regularity, sometimes before hitting even 50,000 miles. Mechanics quickly learned to dread them, as parts availability was a mess, and repairs rarely lasted. Worse, many owners were using these trucks for work, hauling loads, towing trailers, or relying on them for farms and businesses. When the engines let go, it wasn't just inconvenient, it was financially devastating. The damage to GM's reputation was enormous. Word spread fast that GM diesels were unreliable, and the stigma lasted for decades. Even when GM eventually got serious about diesels with the Duramax in the early 2000s, many older truck buyers still remembered the nightmare of the Olds-based engines and swore they'd never buy a GM diesel again. For a company trying to compete with Ford and Dodge in the heavy-duty market, it was a self-inflicted wound that nearly destroyed their credibility. The Chevy CK10 diesels of the late 70s and early 80s are still remembered today as a cautionary tale. Instead of delivering the efficiency and toughness diesel buyers expected, they offered unreliability and financial pain. For older truck fans who lived through it, the sound of one of those engines coughing to life in winter wasn't the sound of durability. It was the sound of trouble brewing. They stand as one of the clearest examples of how cutting corners in engineering can backfire spectacularly. Number 1. Ford F-150, 2004 to 2008. The Ford F-150 has long been the crown jewel of American pickups. For decades, it's been the best-selling truck in the U.S., the kind of vehicle dads pass down to sons, and the go-to workhorse for farmers, contractors, and families alike. But between 2004 and 2008, Ford saddled its most popular truck with an engine that became a nightmare for owners, the 5.4-liter 3-valve Triton V8. On paper, the Triton sounded like a winner. It promised plenty of horsepower, smooth operation, and modern engineering. In reality, it delivered one of the most frustrating ownership experiences of any truck in modern history. The first and most notorious issue was its spark plugs. Instead of using a simple one-piece design, Ford engineers developed a two-piece spark plug that had a tendency to seize inside the cylinder head. When mechanics or owners tried to change them, the plugs would often snap in half, leaving part of the plug stuck deep in the engine. What should have been a basic maintenance job turned into an expensive, nerve-wracking ordeal that required special extraction tools and sometimes even head removal. But the headaches didn't stop there. The Triton also suffered from cam phaser problems, timing chain issues, and loud ticking noises that made brand-new trucks sound like they'd been abused for decades. Owners reported rough idling, power loss, and repair bills that often ran into the thousands. For a truck that was supposed to symbolize rugged dependability, the 2004 to 2008 F-150 instead became infamous for sending loyal Ford fans running to other brands. The worst part was that these problems didn't just affect a few trucks, they were widespread. Mechanics across the country grew familiar with the Triton's quirks, and forums filled with horror stories from frustrated owners who couldn't believe their prized F-150 had become such a money pit. While some engines soldiered on with minimal issues, too many failed spectacularly, staining the reputation of America's favorite pickup. For older truck fans who lived through it, the Triton era stands out as one of Ford's lowest moments. It wasn't just a bad engine, it was a betrayal of the trust people placed in a truck that was supposed to last a lifetime. Even today, mention a mid-2000s F-150 in the used market, and many buyers will ask the same question. Does it have the 5.4 Triton? If the answer is yes, most walk away. That alone cements its place at the top of this list. And there you have it, 10 of the worst American trucks ever to hit the road. From the Chevy SSR's impractical midlife crisis styling to the Lincoln Blackwood's carpeted cargo box, from GM's doomed diesel experiment to Ford's Triton disaster, these trucks all share one thing in common. They failed the people who trusted them. Trucks are supposed to be about reliability, durability, and the promise that they'll have your back whether you're hauling a load of lumber or heading across the country. But these models became cautionary tales, reminders that even the biggest names in Detroit can stumble, sometimes badly. For those of you who lived through these years, maybe you owned one of these trucks yourself, maybe you still have the repair receipts tucked away, or maybe you just remember watching neighbors curse under their breath when their brand new pickup failed. The lesson? Never buy into marketing hype alone. A tough-looking grille and glossy ad campaign don't guarantee a truck will stand the test of time. Always check the track record, do the research, and talk to the people who've actually put the miles on them. So, which of these trucks shocked you the most? Did you ever own one of these lemons? Or maybe narrowly escape buying one back in the day? Drop your story in the comments below, and let's hear your war stories from the road. And stay tuned, because next time we'll flip the script and look at the trucks that got it right. The ones that saved their brands and earned their place as true American legends.